Yep. Ladies, gentlemen, bodies of water, welcome to the Alchemy Lab, and more importantly, welcome to the Alchemist's Toolkit, where we don't actually do RP. We talk about role-playing games and things like that. I am Lee, just being Lee today.
I'm Carl, and I'm just being Carl.
And I'm Matt. Welcome back. Welcome back to the Alchemist's Toolkit. What's our topic today, gentlemen?
We need a better opener for that, don't we? We're going to need to think about a better opener.
We'll workshop
to say I'm Lee, being Lee. No, so we've been planning.
Just being ourselves, man.
Just being ourselves, just being really chill, really cool.
Just be yourself.
Oh God, it's turning into that.
No, so today we are talking about playing role-playing games with two players. Yeah. Now, as you know, this is a two-player game that we go through in the streets of Mir, and it will always be, well, I won't say, never say always and never say never, but generally these will be smaller games, and that's normally quite hard to run when it comes to, especially D&D. There's probably more role-playing systems out there which cater to this. But normally, I think even in the player's handbook and the Dungeon Master's handbook, it says about 3 to 5 is sort of your sweet like spot on when you're playing it.
Right. So why is it so difficult with two players?
Well, the first thing is if you've got two players and they don't know each other, it's going to be really, really hard to have that chemistry in the role play section. Mm-hmm. Like, because you've got two things. You've got two things in D&D. You've got RP role play, and you've got battling, okay, and they're both really difficult, I think, with two players. I'll talk about role play, and then we can go on to the next one. But like, if you guys don't have chemistry, it's going to be really, really hard to do that role play. If you don't know sort of like who they are and how they play and things like that. I think one of my favorite, we were just talking about this just before we shot it. So we were playing the Alchemy role-playing system that I made and I'm still making, and I still haven't completed it. Every time I'm on these calls, I'm like, I'll do it next time. I'm gonna put something on my calendar when you guys are talking to fucking finish it. But we did a Wild West one, and there'd been this big battle and things like that, and the two guys that were in it, I was basically playing the same guy. Carl was running this one. He was running the Wild West one. Matt was playing a different character, as Matt generally does. You haven't yet seen Matt play if you're watching this live or very close to when we've been streaming it, but he was playing a doctor. What was your name?
Doc.
Doc. Okay, there we are.
You were just Doc, yeah.
But he had a surname. He had a surname, but I can't remember what it was.
You would never use
everyone
it.
Just called him Doc.
Yeah, it was never used. You would introduce it as Doc such and such, and you would just say, just call me Doc.
Yeah.
That was it.
But we made this whole sort of fantastical backstory for both of them of how they met. We didn't do it beforehand. We just sort of turned.
Can I maybe explain the world a bit to sort of do this? So
go for it. Yeah.
Very quick top-down view. For people who've heard this before, it's essentially a Weird West setting. So Wild West meets magic and supernatural shit. So in the version I had, Civil War lasted for an additional 5 years, and was because a bunch of European vampire families supported the South and effectively gave them an undead army for a bit. A bunch of other people then joined the North, and it balanced the forces out, and you ended up with it becoming a bit, the state, the United States was fucked, broken. It was called the Broken States, effectively. You had a bunch of small factions left over in what would have been the different, so you had the Union died, and you had two versions of that, and you had the Confederate States had fallen apart. Some of it was free state, some of it was vampiric controlled.
Now this was post Civil War, wasn't it?
Yeah, this would have been in the setting of the game. I said it was around 1890-ish, effectively.
Because Doc was from the South.
Yes, you were a Southerner,
and I was a Northerner.
And you were a Northerner.
Yeah. You were also part vampire.
What? This is news to me. What? Okay. And
it never came up in the gameplay. We didn't get far enough into it, fortunately. No.
But so when we play the alchemy system, we don't do like when you look at sort of like D&D and things like that. Normally, you need to get like the source books, and you do sort of like a session 0, which probably takes about 1 to 2 hours for you to go through. You need to be picking your skills. You need to be picking this, doing that, and there's a whole like really, with this system, once it's done, it will be in the description where you can sort of look at this and have a go with it. It's really quick to roll up characters. Well, you don't actually roll them up, but to create characters.
The thing with Alchemy is it basically is designed to be versatile and to cater to a smaller party or a larger party. Like it depends.
Yeah. Long and short of it is it's a storytelling toolkit as much as anything else.
Yeah.
Work something into it. So you can play it with 2 characters. You can play it with 6 characters, and the game master gets more difficult the more people you've got in it. Anyway, so we rolled up these characters. I'm like, well, I'm just basically going to play Cassius, who's probably called Cassius in that, and then we had Doc. From differing sides, it was kind of a Romeo and Juliet kind of bromance thing that kind of blossomed. But one thing that came up was the Battle of Tallahassee. I didn't even know where it was before we actually started playing, but we kept talking about Tallahassee. Apparently Tallahassee is in Florida. One day I'll maybe go there and see if there's the absolute massive crater, death crater that we created it in there.
But the lore around it just grew and grew.
Yeah,
from us talking.
Yeah,
and it was not in the base world that I built. I had not given it any. I had one major battle that I named. That was the Battle of Washington, which was the turning point of the war, where things finally started to flip to the Union's favor. That was the only thing in the actual war that I'd specifically called out.
Yeah, we weren't even anywhere near Florida, were we?
No,
I think we.
No, you were in Austin, Texas. We were would become Austin.
We were in Texas.
Yeah. But
the thing is, right? So we have done this a lot, right? So we have. I mean, most of our games, we've played a lot of games where it's just been a party of 2 and a GM or a DM.
Yep.
But a lot of people don't do that because, I mean, it is tricky, and the kind of conceit with something like D&D is you have a larger party of people. Yeah. You have, I think you mentioned, Lee, you mentioned they're 3 to 5.
3 to 5 is soft spot. So normally you've got about 4 people playing.
Well,
now, why is that?
Well, from D&D's previous systems, older editions would have essentially had 4 class types. Mm-hmm. You had striker, leader, controller, and something else. I can't remember the 4th. But different classes.
No, that would be striker. Types. Healer, tank.
Probably healer, something like that.
You had a tank or something like that. You had 4.
The 4 class types. They weren't necessarily the classes, but classes would fall into those types.
Yeah.
And I think that's where in 5e the 3 to 5 comes from, because it's kind of a legacy of, well, it kind of works best with this sort of area, because when you look at the classes now, they still kind of have that tank, damage, healer, controller mentality. Rogues can dish out insane levels of damage.
They're strikers, absolutely.
They're striker.
Rogues and rangers are your strikers. Then you've got like your fighters,
your wizardry controller,
and your paladins.
Paladin will be a tank, barbarian.
They're your tanks there. You've got your wizards, your warlocks, and things like that. They're your controllers, because they can sort of control. Controllers
they have a lot of area of effect stuff as well that other classes don't have.
And as you reduce the number of players, you essentially reduce the number of those things. You reduce your options.
Yeah.
So fights, in particular fights, because D&D is very combat focused.
Mm-hmm.
Because of that, like, you're reducing the amount of versatility potentially you have in a fight. So if you're fighting against a certain kind of enemy, you could be in trouble.
Yep.
And if you haven't got sort of like a versatile or sort of expert DM, he could put you in a bit of trouble if he sort of just puts in just one certain type of monster that, say you've got like so really in D&D at the moment we have a striker and a tank striker. I mean, Carl does a lot of damage. Carl does an awful lot of damage, but we're dual classed as well. Yes. So Cassius, if he needs to be, is a controller if he wants to be. So there's a controller striker and a sort of a striker tank going on,
Well, I would say Gracchus is also a controller because he has things like Moonbeam.
Yeah. I intentionally picked Druid to offset what I saw and perceived weaknesses of being a solo barbarian.
Yeah.
So if I want to do pure rage and damage, I just go rage. I can't then cast spells, but I'm going to dish out crazy damage. But if I want to be more methodical in the fight, I can just go use a bit more druid mentality and use moonbeam, things like this. But yeah. But getting back to the original point of knowing your characters and going back to Tallahassee and stuff like that, because I think we kind of drifted from that point. Effectively, as the DM in that situation, especially in how Alchemy is set up, is it's very much a collaborative to build the world. I let them talk about this. I let them talk to each other effectively about their stories around that, and we built this pivotal moment in the world's history. Effectively, it became the point where everything went to shit. That although there was already supernatural things in the world, Tallahassee was so monumentally damaging to what I had created as the arcane wind, so the expression of why magic exists, that it unleashed all manners of fucking horrors on the world. It was not planned for me in any way at all, but it just became a natural part of it. And I have since run that same world again with Lee in this case, but not Matt. And Tallahassee was still a key feature of that world because it was done in such a way that, like, no, this is perfect because it lets me build so many other things out of the explanation process for that.
So the point there really is you've got to be a bit versatile with you've got to, as the DM, you've got to kind of include the players in the creative process. Otherwise,
absolutely. If you're playing with a small number,
you can't all come from you in a way.
Yeah. If you're building this, if you're playing a game with a small number, my takeaway from what we from the Alchemist playthrough was don't be precious with the world you've built, because especially in a small group, these guys need their own stories in it, not just the story that you want to tell, but they need their own story to feel like they're part of the world. In a bigger group, you can sort of circumvent that because they become their own story as the group. But when you've got two people who are the focus of the narrative in a way, then they need to have the reason to be that focus. They need to be part of the process for that.
I mean, I think that's like a key rule anyway for any DM, is to not be precious about that story. You know, don't let players steamroll you in these things. You know, we've
and they will try.
But this will happen, but there needs to be this balance between, because if we get too precious, we railroad people down a story. There's no sort of avenue for creative expression for not only for the players, because they get to sort of indulge in sort of creating their own story, but then there's sort of that secondary sort of rebound sort of creative input that the DM can have as well. There becomes this synergy between what's happening. Okay, yeah, that's a really good idea. I can now see something coming through in my story. Okay, yeah, so this is what happened in Tallahassee. Okay, so this really big war happened there. So this is where the winds of magic came from, and then this happened, and then this happened, and it sort of becomes sort of like this really positive echo chamber of bouncing ideas around and making a story much, much richer.
And reward ingenuity.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, this is a thing. I think this is a D&D thing, or a GM thing in general, really.
Absolutely.
No matter how much you plan, your players are going to think of a way that to solve a problem that you haven't thought of. No matter how many avenues you put
absolutely.
In. So, I mean,
there's
you kind
the
of
old
got to
saying,
roll with it at a time and reward it because it's
There's the old saying, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. And obviously, as a GM, you're not fully antagonistic to the players. This is something to remember. You really want your players to succeed. You know, you've put a lot of work into this story.
You can make it challenging.
While you don't want to be precious, you want it to be challenging, but you don't want to TPK, total player kill these. You don't want to do that. You know,
if it happens, it happens. But
it does, absolutely.
Don't actively create a scenario where that's the only outcome.
There wants to be this balance between boredom and anxiety, doesn't there? We don't want our players and the GM to be bored. We don't want them to be like, fuck, he's going to put us into another battle. The last one was so intense.
We don't have the resources.
I don't have the healing surges.
Yeah.
I don't have I don't have my my spell slots. Do it to them sometimes, do it to
Make
them
them
sometimes.
panic.
Really, yeah, but not all the time, so we can sort of balance this out.
Yeah.
But yeah, no plan survives first contact with the enemy, and really any plan that we make, the enemy is the outside world. We can only see so much of reality to understand what's going on. None of us are sort of like the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes that can go into a fight and go, okay, this is what's going to happen, this is what's going to happen, and then he sort of kills it off. It's fantasy to be in that kind of situation.
What I would say to bring on that point as well is, as the DM or whatever the system wants to call itself, if you have a story that you want to tell, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the reason you're playing the game. No, but what I would say is know the story that you want to tell, but not how you're going to tell it. Know the information that the players need to know, but don't know exactly how they have to come by that. Because, for example, you might give the players. Let's say you're doing a thing, you need to go find some information about this thing. In your head, there is an NPC that they need to find to do this. And you know that this NPC is in town X. But you don't want to force them into that town, because then that's railroading, that's not fun for them.
And then they go to town Y. What happens then? You're like, fuck.
Yeah.
Now we're going to be sat here for 5 hours.
What I tend to do in those situations, and I've made this mistake in the past, when I've played a previous campaign, I let the players do something and realize like, shit, I now haven't got away from to find what I needed to find because it was too far away. So instead, what I do is, okay, cool. You need to find some information. I know where that information is. Go, right. These are the towns nearby. Where do you want to go? And you can describe every town completely differently, and it can play completely differently. But as the DM, as a storyteller, that town every town you pick is the town you need to go to, because every town you pick will have a version of the NPC that has the information. You might obtain it differently. You might not find a person, but you might find evidence of them and a note or whatever. But the fundamental is the same. You go to wherever they want to go, and you let them tell that part of the story, but you make sure that the information they need for the narrative to work is still going to be found there.
Right. So, okay,
we have diverged.
We have diverged way too much.
Absolute chaos. So 2 players.
Yes.
So what do you need to do if you have 2 players? Right. So I've run several games at this point that I've had 2 players. I've done that in D&D 5e. I've done that in the Alchemy system. I've done that in the light version of Alchemy. And it has thus far, it has basically worked out well. So
I guess most of those have been with us, though. We haven't played Alchemy Light. So Streets of Mir obviously has 2 players. And we have, I think, done a game in Alchemy Light, although I can't remember doing it. I have run Alchemy Light for 2 other people as a test run. Yeah.
I was doing a Shattered Lands campaign with 2 people as well. And basically, the keys to success are essentially the same no matter what. So RP is, make it about probably 2/3 RP and 2/3 interaction. Because even if it's 2 people that don't know each other to begin with, they obviously have a session 0 with them, but let them build up that chemistry together, right? Because they may not, if it's 2 people that don't know each other, they're not going to have it immediately. So let them build it, and just kind of take a half a step back and just put them in situations where they can RP and interact with other people and have fun and just do all this stuff. And then they will have that chemistry and they'll get it. And not like in the 2-player campaign I did, the other D&D one, that was with someone who was essentially brand new to D&D, and with a dude who was not, I don't think he was that new to it. He was pretty experienced. He's really good RPer, and he's really good with creating a backstory and getting into his character and getting very invested in his character. So you've got two people with varying experience, and immediately, that first session was almost entirely RP, with a few skill rolls here and there. we didn't get to any combat until probably halfway through the second session, because it was all just okay. Let's get to know these two characters. Let's see who they are, and let them
Sorry, guys, my alarm's
work
going
each
off.
other out a bit, and then go from there.
Yeah.
Now the other thing is, what do you do to ameliorate the mechanics issue that limits? So the way we did it in Streets of Mir and the way we did it in that game was with Gestalt characters. So your character is essentially two characters rolled into one character. So Cassius is... What is Cassius?
He's a warlock.
Rogue,
is he a warlock?
Rogue warlock.
Or a sorcerer? He's one of the two.
No, you're a warlock because you've got a patron.
Thank you.
Yeah, rogue warlock. And Carl Gracchus is...
Barbarian druid.
Barbarian druid. So the other ones were monk rogue.
Nice combo.
And druid fighter.
Again, nice combo.
Right. So those two, so they really kind of locked into what they needed to do and how to kind of maximize their like ability as two players.
Yeah.
And also it gives you a balance of skills, and it gives you a balance of, okay, so like one of them will have, like, as a druid, they'll have more nature stuff. The rogue will have more, I can pick locks, I can traverse, I can do X, Y, Z.
Well, yeah, we see this sort of dichotomy between Cassius and Gracchus, don't we? Like, I have basically all skills. I think there's about 4 that I don't have a proficiency in. Like, rogues are so good for that, especially when there's someone who's very combat focused, very spongy when it comes to combat. Like, they're not necessarily going to be as, like, every time we've sort of been in RP and there's roles, the amount of times you've heard Gracchus go, "Oh, I don't have that role." Like, I've got 1 in this. Yeah. Whereas Cassius has got sort of like a 12. So I think sort of the impetus comes onto the player at that point to sort of balance that out. But then comes back to the DM if someone is new to this, to go, okay, so here's sort of the kind of things that we're going to be doing. These are the skills. This is going to be happening outside of combat. There's going to be a lot of this kind of stuff happening. And then also we're going to need someone who's a bit more punchy as well. And then, go on.
Well, you've got to populate your world as well.
Absolutely.
You've got to have people they can interact with, people they can team up with.
Mm-hmm.
And as we've done in Streets of Mir, that we haven't done in the Shattered Lands, but we have done in Streets of Mir, I haven't played different characters. Have you? Yeah. If you can split them. You can split your group up if you want. If that's what they do.
Yeah.
They can go their separate ways, and in which case they can mix it up, and someone can play a different character for a bit.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is something that's regularly done in D&D, but this is something that has started since I DM'd for us when we were about 15, 16, around then. So quite a long time.
Yeah,
is that so I wanted to play as well when I was the DM. So I DM'd, but I also sort of had sort of proto Cassius at that point, and he was part of the party. A lot of the time you'll see Matt has a character within D&D as well, to kind of like, if needed, we can sort of fill that gap, which again makes it a lot easier to make to sort of make like monster parties that are coming for you. There's a lot more sort of targets for them to hit. It makes it a tiny little less sort of damaging and dangerous for the party, but it doesn't feel that way on the outside of it, does it?
Yeah, from the, we all know this from the GM perspective, balance is a really like important thing.
Yeah. The last thing you want is an unbalanced feel. What I will say as a precaution to the GM character, because this can happen, and I have played in games where it has happened, is do not be tempted to make your GM character a Mary Sue.
Well, don't do that, and also don't have the GM character solve anything.
Yeah, solve the things.
Have them give the odd hint, maybe.
Yeah, if they're really struggling, let them maybe go, "Oh, well, I heard this thing." don't make the GM character the know-all, the overpowered anime protagonist, basically.
Yeah.
For lack of a better term, if you're going to have a GM character, it has to play like a normal member of the party.
Oh, I'm immediately rethinking Ender.
The thing with Ender is used sparingly, so it's not too bad. He's not like a Charon or something who's around quite a bit. He's like, he pops up, he's hyper specialized, and then disappears.
Oh yeah.
And he doesn't ever really sort of come into it and go, I'm going to do this thing. We kind of have to ask him to do it.
Yeah, every time we've worked with Ender, it's very much been we need a hand.
He's basically there just going, well, funny quip.
Well, I'm over here.
Yeah, he is the old style James Bond quipper with the incredible skill set that comes with that, and we had to ask for his help. And as soon as what we're doing is done, he goes away again.
Off he fucks. Yeah. One thing I would like to say as well is if you're not as experienced as a DM, and even if you have less sort of experienced players and things like that, is to, once that story is coming up and you haven't got a lot of people there, is to help with this matchmaking. Basically, you become sort of like a social matchmaker, basically, don't you, with these sort of places that you're putting them into. You need to put these people into areas where their strengths can be shown as well, and their weaknesses can be shown as well. Where you put someone at a disadvantage, because it's happened a lot of times through this game. I remember there was one of our cases where you had to be quite stealthy, and Gracchus is not a stealthy character.
Nihilist, that was when we had to track women through the city.
Nihilist in the Temple of Gond.
Yeah,
as well.
And there was the one where Cassius was gone, so Gracchus has to be the investigator. And everything like that. Really,
the number of traps Gracchus sets off by just kicking indoors.
Kick in a door, bang,
bang.
Kick in a
arrow
door,
in the chest,
bang. So have things that play to their strengths, to one player's strengths, so they can really come into the fore. The other person can understand how they like to play as well. Because we all pick up on things. We're social creatures at the end of the day. After a few hours of playing with someone, we can sort of start to understand how they want to play, see how it aligns with how we play. We like to find resonance with people. We like to find resonance with people that we're around and sort of make them feel happy and get some sort of joy out of that as well. So playing, really making things that are really acutely to their strengths and to their weaknesses, to see how they play in both of those areas, can help the two people come together and be like, okay, this is how we work these things out. Then we become a team together. Okay, right, so I can take this kind of thing, you can take that kind of thing, and it goes on from there. Yeah,
excellent point there. Yes. And the other thing I would say is I think having two players can potentially make you kind of as the GM, if you're making it can make you kind of reduce the scope of the world a little bit in your own head. You don't have to do that. I think you can do like a full-fledged D&D epic adventure if you wanted to, with two players. I think though it is set up, if you have smaller parties, it is set up better for something a bit small. So something like Streets of Mir, which is a
more intimate
noir
story.
It's a more intimate story.
Yeah,
it's noir. It's investigating. The battles are always usually in tight quarters where you're facing off against one or two things.
Yeah, there's always low numbers of combatants and things like that as well.
Yeah.
But we've just done like a massive airship fight, and you were in the jungle and you took on a big old T-Rex thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you can
have those epic moments.
Apart from that, we have played in a town. This entire time we have been in a city.
Often not just a town, a small segment of said town as well.
A district. We have been playing in a district for basically a year. Yes, we went off to a forest, but again, really, you could just call that district forest. This is still a very small area that we've played in, but it doesn't make it any...
Every setting where the players are in is actually quite a small setting. but that doesn't prevent you from having an epically scaled world.
Absolutely.
When you talk about Mir as a entity, we refer to it level by level because in essence every level is a city, effectively.
And how vast does it feel, and how unknown does it feel?
We mention it all the time. It comes up in Mir quite a bit. We talk about tier 2, tier 3, and how otherworldly that is to anyone below those tiers. Even people in tier 4 who are deemed to be insanely wealthy by everybody else are nothing compared to people in tier 3 and tier 2.
It's its own ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly. Mir is its own globe, effectively, its own scaled world down, and yet you have the entire Shattered Lands around that that still is active as well.
We know essentially infinite.
We know of another place
that
was having a war and things like that, but this has largely been done on such a small scale, and really that is a masterclass by you, Matt, really, as the DM, to sort of make those kinds of. So how do you make that exciting to play small scale? I know we're going off topic a bit, but I think this is really important because we can always go for the real. We can go to the real fantastical, and it's to be a global or even a galactic scale kind of thing, but you can still tell a really good story in a neighborhood.
Well, I mean, it's all about. So, I mean, if you have a lower player count, for example, it's going and you want kind of more tight sort of things. The things that don't seem as threatening to a larger party are going to be way more threatening. So zombies are going to be way more threatening. Things like harpies we know that because in our test game I killed you with a harpy.
I died in our test game to a harpy. It sung to me, I walked off, and that's why I have Featherfall on my character.
Well, that's the thing, like something that wouldn't necessarily be as big a threat is suddenly a bigger or a huge threat, particularly if you're lower level. So you've got to keep that in mind. Like you can have just a combat between like your 2 players and 1 or 2 other things, and it's still going to be a big sort of. It's going to be a challenge because, like, I think so. I've almost killed you so many times, Carl.
The T-Rex fight, I survived by my orcish resilience.
Yeah,
so I should have died, but I went to 1 HP instead.
The T-Rex fight and the fight in tier 8 in Raven.
I died as well, and that's why I picked that ghost realm thing where I can speak to Flash. Woof!
Yeah. Woof! That was a story death. Like in Raven,
I died from getting taken away, didn't I? Yeah.
In Raven, like, so it was you and Travok against essentially 3 goons.
Yep.
And it was close.
Oh,
it was real close.
I'm pretty sure. I think it had been if I had missed an attack and the round had continued for 1 more cycle, I wouldn't have been around.
I think you had a full round at 1 hit point.
Yeah, like the final round. No, I didn't hit 1. I hit like 3 or 4. I think I was basically one.
You definitely went down and then up.
Sorry, no, you're right. I would have gone down at 1 point, and I did the last round of combat on a hit point.
I think this exposes something though. Both the times that you died were with Travok. Travok was not a Gestalt character.
Class,
yeah, he was not a Gestalt character.
He was a level higher, but he was a single.
Yeah, but he was still just a ranger.
Yeah, the T-Rex also had Surax. There was 3 party members there, but again, they were both single class characters.
He was a T-Rex.
Yeah,
and Surak and Travok were both kind of similar.
We were both ranged fighters. Yeah. So both of those times, you were the 100% damage sponge.
So really, I mean, if we're being honest, that's probably an error on my part for not making Surak like I guess so. Travok would have been a striker. You're like the control / damage dealer, tank. So he really should have been like a healer.
He probably should have been
a bit of control, maybe.
Yeah.
So
But also,
mean,
I think, that also comes down to sort of like a session zero of what is required, what we're going into, and things like that. Because Travok could have been anything.
Yeah.
Right, but that's not an error on your part so much as that's an error on my part. So you've got to be careful as the DM as well.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, in that regard,
situations.
especially in a small player game, you don't want to take the freedom of choice away from the player by saying, "Hey, by the way, this is what we're going to be facing, so you're going to need this stuff."
I know. What I mean is, but I knew what Travok was, and
True.
I knew what Surak was, what Gracchus was.
Yeah.
So I have control over what Surak is. So that's not me. That's not me, like gaming it. That's me. Like
yeah. Fair point.
It's not like telling you what you're going to face. So keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm.
If you're Gestalt or if you're not, I mean, keep that in mind.
Yeah, as the never forget. Always remember what roles your players have.
Yeah.
Because you will need to balance the encounters for that purpose. If you've got a bunch of ranged combatants, you don't want a bunch of enemies that are immediately going to close them into melee combat all the time.
Immediately going to like double dash in and just like fucking shank them. Because then they're done.
Immediately go in and hit you with the big mouth and its weird eldritchy mouth.
Yeah.
So I have no idea how long this has been going on for. So let's wrap up. So let's summarize it with our kind of main points here. So running a 2-player game.
Yeah, key point from each. I think as a DM, I think my key takeaway from this is to put them in areas of strength and weakness, put them in situations where they are strong, put them in areas where they are weak. Then this resonance sort of mechanic of people comes in and they can go, okay, this is what he does, this is what I does. We sort of fit into our roles at that point.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it would be give them a means to care about the story that they're telling. So if that means letting them have input in the world, i.e. let them build scenarios into it that give them a reason to care, do it. You need, if you've got a small group, you need the investment of those players in the world to make the game run. So give them every opportunity to do that.
Mm-hmm. And mine would be, I kind of have two. So mine would be give them a chance to figure each other out.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be with RP. I mean, that's mainly if they don't know each other already.
Yeah.
Give them a chance to figure each other out with RP. Give them a chance to figure each other's characters out a bit. And also, make sure everything's balanced.
Mm-hmm.
As to the best of your ability. Now, obviously, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. But just in case, like, do the best of your ability.
Yeah.
And adjust on the fly if you have to.
And we've missed one more thing as well, which is the not railroading, and this is a collaborative storytelling experience.
Yes.
Right. Yes, be precious about your story. Yes, some players will try and steamroll and just make their own story up. You need to set boundaries over that and what you're going to allow and what you're going to not. Okay. But your players will inevitably come up with cool shit, right? Refer to the rule of cool. If it sounds fun, like go with it. Just like keep it going a little bit. If it goes a bit too much off, then bring them back somehow and start to have this sort of rebounding effect between the two. Okay, yeah, that's a good idea. Now this is what I can give to that. And we can sort of start to pass each other notes basically on how this story is written. And all of a sudden, the story becomes all the more richer because you've had 3 people collaborating on a really, really cool story.
There is one more thing as well.
There's so many things
that we haven't even gotten into yet.
Yeah.
So this is just kind of like a word of caution, really.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got a 2-player game, and you're considering expanding it, be very, very careful about expanding it to fit more players.
Oh, okay. So adding
especially
more
if you're
players
doing Gestalt characters.
Okay.
Be very careful. Add one more, maybe.
That sounds like a really, really difficult balance issue.
I think that could be a topic in its own self.
So that 2-player game that I was talking about before, and if you're watching, I'm not having a go at you, but so it started off with 2, it's now 4.
Okay.
And it took a minute to rebalance,
Uh-huh.
because you're essentially going from two. I mean, you'd be essentially going from 2 players, but 4 characters,
Four
really, because
characters.
they gestalt
To 8.
to 8 at a certain level as well. So
Yeah.
just keep that in mind. Keep balance in mind, definitely.
Because balance is going to be very, very difficult, especially with Gestalt characters. Absolutely.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
on that note, thank you for listening. This is some good stuff. I definitely encourage people to try like smaller player games.
If done well, they are so much fun.
Yes. And it keeps things fresh as well, because it'll be a
Yeah,
different
absolutely.
kind of game than if you're getting a bit burned with D&D, try a 2-player.
Mm.
Try something with a lower player count, because it just adds different things in there.
Different dynamics and everything like that. Give the first couple of hours to role play for them to understand each other, throw some things in that they're good at, throw some things in that they're bad at, and it becomes a completely different game.
Mm-hmm.
We've been playing this for a year. The Streets of Mir for a year at this point. We were talking about it earlier, and it's so much fun still. We're like, wow, like we're really excited for the next episode that we're bringing out, the next case. Yeah, try it.
Give
It is
a go.
fun.
All right, so you can find me on Minds at Matt Waterhouse Author.
You can find me somewhere. Still haven't looked about where it is. Right.
And I am still not there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like, comment, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Try new things, because it's a good time. And we'll see you in the next whatever it is. Either one of these or a case. Who knows?
Yes.
I feel
Who
like I
knows?
anticlimaxed the goodbye, so I'm just going to awkwardly press the stop recording button. Bye.